Welcome to the deep dive. If you're working anywhere in the digital economy today, you're basically living in a world defined by information risk. It's everywhere.
Absolutely. Every transaction, every cloud service you spin up, every single employee logging in from home.
It's a potential vector, right, for, well, catastrophic failure. And we're not just talking about little glitches.
No, we're talking serious financial hits, massive fines from regulators, and reputational damage that can be, frankly, permanent.
Managing that kind of risk, it's got to be one of the most complex and expensive things any modern organization has to deal with.
It really is. It's the high-stakes game of modern business. The threats move so fast, they're so sophisticated, you can't just rely on, ad hoc fixes or a basic firewall anymore. That's just asking for trouble.
So that's our mission for you today. We want to give you a bit of a strategic edge. We're doing a really thorough deep dive into the main blueprint designed to manage all this chaos. ISO IEC 2701.2022.
Yeah, latest version.
We're going beyond just defining it. We want you to grasp not just what it is, but how it actually works as a strategic tool, an operational engine, and, well, commercial necessity for resilience globally.
Okay, so for listeners familiar with this space, ISO 2701 is pretty much the gold standard internationally. It lays out how an organization should establish, implement, maintain, and this is key, continually improve an information security management system, an ISMS.
ISMS.
And it's crucial to get this. An ISMS isn't just a piece of software you install. It's a whole system. It's process-driven, holistic. It covers policies, procedures, people, technology. Think of it as a management layer over the whole organization.
That's a really important distinction. It's not just for the IT folks. It's a business-wide framework. So if the ISMS is the system, what's the sort of core philosophy behind it? What guides everything?
The absolute bedrock is the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
CIA.
Everything within the ISMS, every policy, every control, every procedure has to be there to protect at least one of those three principles. Confidentiality means only authorized people get access. Integrity means the data is accurate, complete, hasn't been messed with. And availability means authorized users can get to the systems and data when they need to.
So if a control doesn't clearly serve one of those?
Then, arguably, it doesn't belong in the ISMS. It's extraneous. It keeps the focus sharp on what really matters for security.
And the power of having this structured approach is pretty clear when you look at how widespread it is. This isn't some niche standard.
Not at all. It's designed to scale. It works for tiny startups, huge multinationals across all sectors, IT, healthcare, finance, you name it.
And the numbers back that up.
Oh, yeah. The latest figures show huge adoption. Over 70,000 certificates issued in something like 150 countries. If a global client asks if you're secure, pointing to your ISO 27701 certification is probably the quickest, most credible way to say yes. It signals maturity.
Okay, so to really get the current version, the 2022 one, we kind of need to look back at how it evolved, right? It didn't just appear fully formed. It started smaller, more local.
That's right. Its roots are actually in the UK with the British standard BS 7799. That first came out in 1995.
BS 7799.
It was really the first proper attempt to systematically outline how to manage information security practices. It's basically the ancestor, the DNA of what we have today.
So the UK develops this standard for its own needs, and then they big international players, ISO and the IEC, they pick it up.
Exactly. The core ideas, the code of practice part, became ISO IE 17799 back in 2000. But, and this is important, at that point, it was just guidance, not something you could get certified against.
Right. So when did the certification piece come in?
That was the big step in 2005. That's when the management system part became certifiable as ISO IEC 27001. That shift from just guidelines to a certifiable standard, that's what turned it into a strategic asset that could be independently verified. Huge difference.
And then the version most people probably worked with for years was the 2013 revision. Why was that one such a big deal?
2013 was pivotal, mainly because it introduced the high-level structure, or HLS, sometimes called Annex A.
HLS, right.
This aligned 27001 structure, the clause numbers and core text, with other big ISO management systems. Think ISO 90001 for quality, or 14001 for environmental management.
Okay, so that made it easier for companies juggling multiple ISO standards.
Absolutely. If you were a large corporation managing quality, environmental, and security, having that common structure made integrating everything much, much simpler. It also expanded the Annex A controls, the list of security measures, to 114, reflecting the growing complexity back then.
Which brings us to the latest version, ISO 27001.2022, Edition 3. Now this is interesting. Threats have obviously exploded since 2013. Remote work, cloud everywhere, supply chain attacks. So why did the committee decide to cut the number of controls? From 114 down to 93, that seems backward.
Yeah, it does seem counterintuitive at first glance, and a lot of practitioners had that same question. But the reduction wasn't about weakening security. It was really about efficiency and modernizing.
How so?
Well, a fair few of the 114 controls in the 2013 version were a bit dated or overlapped or just weren't quite right for today's world, especially with cloud being so dominant. The 2022 version consolidated a lot of those, merged them. It focused more on the security objective rather than prescribing rigid steps.
Okay, clearer goals.
Right. And importantly, it also added new controls to address things that just weren't as big a deal in 2013. Things like threat intelligence, specific controls for cloud services, secure coding practices. It made the standard more relevant to today's risks.
And it's always evolving, isn't it? You mentioned a very recent tweak as well.
Yes, just this year, 2024, Amendment 1 came out. It's fascinating because it weaves in climate action.
Climate action in an information security standard.
Sounds odd, but it makes sense when you think about risk. It requires organizations to consider climate-related risks as part of their overall context and risk assessment. Things like what happens to your data center if there's a major flood or fire. It links that physical world disruption driven by climate change back to information availability and resilience. It connects sustainability to operational security.
Interesting link. Okay, let's pivot to the big why. ISO 27001 is voluntary. Companies are already dealing with GDPR, APA, PCI DSS, all sorts of mandatory stuff. Why take on the significant cost and effort for something optional?
Because ultimately it translates to trust. And trust translates to business. Getting certified isn't just about internal improvement. It's a powerful, externally validated signal to the market. Yeah. Imagine you're bidding for a big contract, especially internationally. Your competitor might just say they're secure. You can show them your ISO 27001 certificate audited by a third party. That often gives you a serious edge. It answers a whole lot of questions about your security posture up front. It turns security from just an overhead cost into, potentially, a competitive advantage.
And there's actual ROI data. It's not just a feeling.
Oh, definitely. We looked at some case studies. One tech company, after getting certified, saw customer retention jump by 20%. Why? Because the certification satisfied the security demands of their major clients, streamlined the whole due diligence process.
Wow, 20% retention is huge.
It is. And another example, a financial institution operating in multiple countries. They used ISO 27001 to standardize their security approach globally. They reported a 30% drop in audit findings across the board.
30% fewer findings. That saves a ton of time and hassle, I bet.
Exactly. Less time arguing with auditors, lower admin costs, potentially fewer fines down the road. But the real core value, maybe the biggest ROI, is proactive risk reduction.
Preventing breaches in the first place.
Precisely. Implementing a proper ISMS with its mandatory risk assessment and treatment cycle. Studies suggest it can cut the likelihood of a major data breach by somewhere between 30% and 50%.
Okay, 30 to 50%.
Now, compare the cost of implementation, let's say even $40,000 for a complex setup, against the average cost of a serious data breach, which can easily run into millions. The ISMS suddenly looks like a very smart strategic investment, doesn't it? It's about long-term survival.
Okay, so we've established the ISMS isn't a one-and-done project. It has to keep evolving, right? If it just sits there, it's useless. So what's the engine that drives that constant improvement? The mandated model.
That would be the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. PDCA, it's famous. It comes originally from quality management, but ISO standards adopted it wholesale. It's the mandatory operational loop for the ISMS.
PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act.
Exactly. It forces the security program into a continuous feedback loop. You plan your approach, you do it, implement it, you check how well it's working, and then you act to make improvements based on what you learned. Then those improvements feed back into the next plan cycle. It prevents the security program from becoming static and outdated.
And the core requirements of the standard itself, those mandatory clauses 4 through 10, they map directly onto this PDCA cycle.
They do, very neatly. The plan phase is the biggest chunk up front, covering clauses 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, let's start there. Clause 4, context of the organization. What does that actually mean in practice?
Clause 4 is fundamental. Get this wrong, and the rest is built on sand. It forces you to define your operating environment. What are the external factors? Think legal requirements, GDPR, HIPAA, PCI DSS, maybe contractual obligations to clients, regulatory pressures, the competitive landscape. And what are the internal factors? Your organization's culture, its values, its strategic goals, the needs of internal stakeholders.
So it's about understanding all the forces shaping your security needs.
Precisely. And the most critical output of Clause 4 is defining the scope of your ISMS. What systems, what data, what processes, which physical locations, which people are actually covered by this security management system.
And you have to document that scope very clearly.
Meticulously, you need to justify any exclusions too. If you operate in London and New York, but you decide to exclude the New York office from the ISMS scope without a rock-solid reason, an auditor will pick that up immediately as a major gap.
So getting the scope right, Clause 4.3, stops it from ballooning out of control, or worse, missing something critical.
Exactly. It prevents both scope creep, trying to boil the ocean, and critical emissions, leaving key assets unprotected.
Okay, Clause 4 sets the stage, but we all know security initiatives can die if they don't have backing from the top. How does the standard address that? That's Clause 5, right? Leadership.
Yes, and Clause 5 is non-negotiable. It demands real, demonstrable top management accountability. It's not enough for the CEO to just sign off on a policy and delegate everything.
What does demonstrable mean? What would an auditor look for?
They'll want to see evidence that senior management is actively involved. Are they participating in management review meetings? Are they ensuring adequate resources are allocated? Budget, people, tools. That links to Clause 7. Are they driving the response when things go wrong? Nonconformities, Clause 10. They also have to establish the main information security policy, making sure it aligns with the business strategy, and formally assign security roles and responsibilities. Auditors will interview senior leaders about this stuff.
So no hiding for the execs. Okay, then we get to the real engine room of the plan phase. Clause 6, planning. This is where the risk assessment happens.
This is the core intellectual work, yes. Clause 6 mandates that you define and use a formal risk assessment methodology.
A methodology, like specific steps.
Yes, you need a defined process. It has to include criteria for identifying risks, analyzing them, usually by scoring likelihood and impact, and evaluating them against risk acceptance criteria. You need a consistent, repeatable way to decide if a risk is high, medium, or low, for example. You can't just guess.
And the outcome isn't just a scary list of risks.
No, definitely not. The critical output of Clause 6 is the Risk Treatment Plan, or RTP. This is a vital document for certification.
RTP.
Okay, the RTP details how you plan to address each significant risk you identified. Are you going to mitigate it? Apply controls? Accept it? Formally decide the cost of fixing it outweighs the risk. Avoid it. Stop the risky activity. Or transfer it, like through insurance or outsourcing.
And you have to justify those choices.
Absolutely. And crucially, the RTP must state the residual risk, the risk level remaining after your treatment, and show that management has formally signed off, accepting that residual exposure.
Yeah.
It's about owning the risk. Clause 6 also requires you to set measurable security objectives that link back to business goals, something concrete like reduce credential stuffing incidents by 50% within 6 months.
Okay, that covers plan, context, leadership, risk planning. Now we move into actually doing things, the DO phase, clauses 7 and 8. Let's start with clause 7, support. Sounds like logistics.
It's the enabling clause, really. Clause 7 is about ensuring the ISMS has the fuel it needs to run. That means resources, budget, technology, but just as importantly, it covers people. Competence, awareness, communication.
So training and making sure everyone knows their role.
Exactly. You need documented evidence of training programs, awareness campaigns. How do you communicate security requirements? If your staff don't understand their security responsibilities, the best tech in the world won't save you. Clause 7 is where you build and maintain that security-aware culture. It also covers requirements for documented information controlling your policies and procedures.
Makes sense. And then clause 8, operation. This is where the day-to-day security work happens. Executing the plan from clause 6.
This is the rubber meets the road clause. It requires you to plan, implement, and control the processes needed to meet security requirements and implement the actions determined in clause 6, basically, your risk treatments.
So documented procedures for things like
Patch management, backups, change control, incident response procedures, implementing the specific controls you selected from Annex A based on your risk assessment. If your RTP says you need to implement endpoint detection and response, EDR, Clause 8 is where you document the procedures for deploying, managing, and monitoring that EDR solution. Auditors check that you're actually following these documented operational processes.
Okay, so we've planned, we've done. Now we need to see if it's working. That's the she-CK phase. Clause 9, performance evaluation. How do you measure effectiveness?
Clause 9 mandates monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. You need to figure out what you're going to measure, your security objectives from Clause 6, control effectiveness, how you'll measure it, when you'll do it, and who will analyze the results.
What kind of activities does this involve?
It includes technical testing, like vulnerability scans and maybe penetration tests, But critically, it mandates internal audits. You have to audit your own ISMS periodically to check if it conforms to the standards requirements and your own policies and procedures. These internal audits need to be objective.
And management needs to review the results.
Yes. Clause 9 also requires formal management reviews. Top management has to sit down regularly, look at the performance data, the internal audit results, feedback from stakeholders, the status of risk treatment, and make decisions about the ISMS's continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Clause 9 enforces that.
Right. And that leads us to the final step in the cycle. ACT, Clause 10, improvement, closing the loop.
Exactly. Clause 10 is about learning from mistakes and getting better. When things go wrong, you have a security incident, an audit finds a gap, a nonconformity. You can't just patch the immediate problem.
You need to fix the root cause.
Precisely. Clause 10 requires you to identify nonconformities, determine their root causes, and implement corrective actions to prevent them from happening again. This commitment to addressing the underlying issues ensures the ISMS isn't just maintained, but actually improves over time. It becomes a living entity, constantly adapting and feeding those lessons learned right back into Clause 6 planning for the next PDCA cycle.
Okay, we've gone through the mandatory framework, clauses 4 to 10. That's the structure, the management system itself. Now let's talk about Annex A. This is the long list of security controls, right? 93 of them in the 2022 version. How does this relate to the mandatory clauses?
That's a really important distinction. Clauses 410 are the mandatory requirements for the management system. You must implement those to get certified. Annex A, on the other hand, is a reference set of possible security controls.
A reference set, so you don't have to implement all 93.
Correct. You select controls from Annex A based entirely on the results of your risk assessment and risk treatment decisions made back in Clause 6.
Ah, okay, so the risk assessment drives the control selection.
Exactly. Once you've decided which risks need treatment by implementing controls, you look to Annex A for appropriate options. Your selection of which controls you've chosen to implement, and, just as importantly, which ones you've decided to exclude, must be documented in a crucial document called the Statement of Applicability, or SOA.
Statement of Applicability, SOA. That sounds key.
It's probably the most scrutinized document during an audit. The SOA has to list every single one of the 93 controls from Annex A. For each one, you state, is it applicable to us? Yes or no? If yes, have we implemented it? And if no, if you're excluding it, you must provide a clear justification for that exclusion linked back to your risk assessment.
So, using your earlier example, if a company has 0 cloud footprint, they'd list control A.5.23, information security for use of cloud services, state not applicable, and justify it by saying organization does not utilize cloud services.
Precisely that. Fail to justify an exclusion, and that's a finding from the auditor. Now, Annex A tells you what control objectives to aim for, but it doesn't give much detail on how to implement them.
Right, it's more of a list.
That's where the companion standard, ISO 27002, comes in. ISO 27002 provides detailed guidance and implementation advice for each of the controls listed in Annex A of 27001.
So the analogy you used, 27001 is the menu, 27002 is the cookbook.
That's a great way to put it. 27001 tells you what dishes controls are potentially on offer based on your appetite risk.
Yeah.
27002 gives you the recipes implementation guidance for the dish you choose.
Okay. Now, the 2022 version reorganized Annex A quite a bit. It went from 14 older domains down to just 4 broad themes. Can you walk us through those 4 themes? What's the thinking there?
Yeah, the restructuring aimed for better clarity and logic. It groups controls based on who or what they primarily relate to. The 4 themes are:
Okay.
1. Organizational controls. This is the biggest group, the 37 controls. It covers the high-level governance stuff, policies, roles and responsibilities, information classification, supplier security, asset management, legal compliance. Think of it as the security management framework.
Right, organizational. What's next?
2. People controls. Much smaller, just 8 controls, but critical. This focuses entirely on the human element, background screening for employees, terms of employment, security awareness training, disciplinary processes, remote working policies.
People. Got it. 3rd.
3. Physical controls. 14 controls here. This is about protecting the physical environment, securing offices and facilities, controlling physical access, protecting equipment from theft or damage, clear desk and clear screen policies, secure disposal of media.
Physical. And the last one must be technology.
4. Technological controls. 34 controls, the second largest group. This is where the classic IT security stuff lives: access control, user authentication, cryptography, network security, malware protection, backups, logging, and monitoring, secure development.
That structure makes sense. It flows from governance and people down to the physical and then the technical layers. Let's zoom in on some of the new controls added in 2022. Which ones really highlight how the standard adapted to modern threats?
There were 11 net new controls introduced, often targeting areas where the 2013 standard was maybe a bit weak or outdated. 4 really stand out strategically.
Okay, number 1.
First, A.5.7 Threat Intelligence. This is a big shift towards proactivity. It requires organizations to actively collect and analyze information about emerging threats, attack techniques, and vulnerabilities relevant to them, and then use that intelligence to inform their defenses. It's about anticipating attacks, not just reacting.
Threat intel. Okay, important.
Second, 8.5.23 Information Security for use of cloud services. This was obviously essential. It demands specific policies, risk assessments, and clear agreements with cloud providers. It forces organizations to formally address the shared responsibility model inherent in cloud.
Makes sense given how much is in the cloud now. What about security and development?
That's the third one, 8.8.28 Secure Coding. This pushes security left into the development lifecycle. It requires establishing secure coding principles, training developers, and using security testing tools during development, things like SAST, DAST. It recognizes that insecure applications are a massive vulnerability.
Shifting left. Common theme now. And the fourth.
Fourth highlights the focus on data lifecycle, especially data loss. 8.8.12 Data Leakage Prevention, DLP. This requires implementing measures, often technical tools, but also processes to detect and prevent sensitive information from leaving the organization's control inappropriately. Paired with this are controls like 8.8.11 Data Masking, obscuring data where appropriate, and 8.8.10 Information Deletion, securely destroying data when it's no longer needed. It's about protecting data throughout its entire life.
Those new controls definitely reflect today's landscape. Could you give us maybe one concrete example for each of the 4 domains, just to make it really practical? What might an auditor actually check?
Sure. Let's start with organizational controls. A good example is 8.5.1 Time Information Security and Supplier Relationships. An auditor might pull several of your key supplier contracts and check. Does the contract explicitly require the supplier to meet certain security standards? Does it give you the right to audit their compliance? They're checking if you're managing third-party risk contractually.
Okay, supplier contracts. How about the people controls domain?
A classic one here is A.6.3 Information Security Awareness, Education, and Training. The auditor won't just ask if you do training, they'll want to see training records. Who was trained? When? On what topics? Was the training relevant to their role? Is it recurring? They're checking if the awareness program is real and effective, not just a yearly checkbox.
Training records. Got it. Physical controls. Maybe something simple.
Simple but often overlooked. 8.7.7 Clear Desk and Clear Screen Policy. An auditor might literally do a walk-around. Are sensitive papers left out on desks overnight? Are workstations left unlocked and unattended, displaying sensitive information? It seems basic, but it demonstrates discipline in protecting information physically.
Good point. And finally, technological controls. What's a core example there?
Let's take 8.8.2 Privileged Access Rights. The auditor won't just verify that you have admin accounts. They'll dig deeper. How are privileged rights granted? Is it based on least privilege and just-in-time access? Is the usage logged? Are those logs reviewed regularly? Who approves the access? They want to see robust controls around the most powerful accounts. They might also check 8.8.24. Use of cryptography. Are you using strong standard algorithms like AES 236 for encryption? Is key management handled securely?
All right, so let's say an organization is convinced. They see the strategic value, they understand the framework. But getting certified, it sounds like a pretty big mountain to climb.
Yeah.
Can you break down the typical steps? You mentioned securing management buy-in first.
Absolutely, that's step 0, always. Because without it, you won't get the resources for the actual steps. But assuming you have that commitment, the roadmap generally looks like this. 8 main phases. 1, define your scope. Use Clause 4. Be clear about what's in and what's out. 2, do a gap analysis. Assess your current security state against the ISO $27,000 requirements. Where are the holes? 3, conduct your formal risk assessment. Identify assets, threats, vulnerabilities, calculate risk levels. Clause 6. 4, develop your risk treatment plan. Decide how you'll handle those risks. Clause 6 again. 5, create the necessary policies and procedures, including selecting controls and building your SETO. 6, roll out training and awareness programs. Clause 7. 7, conduct your internal audit and management review. Test the system yourself first. Clause 9. And finally, 8, Engage an external certification body for the formal audits.
That's quite a list. You mentioned timelines earlier, 6 to 12 months for smaller orgs, maybe 8 to 20 for larger ones. What makes it take so long?
It's mostly about maturity and complexity. If you're starting from basically nothing, it just takes time to develop policies, implement controls, train people, and crucially, operate the system long enough to generate evidence. Yeah, the auditor needs to see proof that your ISMS isn't just designed well, but is actually working effectively over a period of time. You need logs, records, meeting minutes. You can't just build it and call the auditor the next day. The system needs time to embed and run. Plus, larger organizations just have more complexity, more systems, more locations, more people, more risks to assess.
Okay, let's talk money. You mentioned the external audit might cost, say, $14,000 to $16,000 for an SME, but the total cost can hit $40,000 or even more. Where does all that extra money go?
Yeah, the audit fee is often just the tip of the iceberg. The other major costs fall into a few buckets. First, consulting. If you don't have deep ISO 27001 expertise in-house, bringing in consultants to guide the process, help with the gap analysis, risk assessment, and documentation can be essential, but expensive. Think potentially $1,500 a day, sometimes more.
Okay, consulting is a big one. What else?
Second, technology. Your gap analysis might reveal you need new tools to meet certain control requirements. Maybe a proper security information and event management, SIEM system for logging, 88.16, or data loss prevention tools, 88.12, or vulnerability scanning software, related to 8.18, or maybe even specific GRC governance, risk, and compliance software to manage all the documentation and workflows. That all adds up.
And then there's the cost people often forget to budget for.
Internal time. Staff effort. This is the big hidden cost. You have to factor in the hours, potentially hundreds of hours, that your IT team, your security team, legal, HR, department managers will spend participating in workshops, writing documentation, gathering evidence for auditors, sitting in audits.
You mentioned department heads might spend 30-plus hours just in prep.
Easily. If you actually calculate the cost of their time being diverted to the ISO project, the true cost of implementation climbs significantly higher than just the external fees and tool purchases. It's a major resource commitment.
Given that commitment, what are the biggest roadblocks? Where do organizations typically stumble or even fail on this journey?
There are three really common hurdles, and they're often linked. First, and this goes back to step 0, is lack of real top management support. If the leadership isn't truly driving it, providing resources, and demanding accountability.
Then you hit the second hurdle, limited resources. Not enough budget, not enough people assigned, not enough time allocated.
Exactly. And that lack of resources often leads directly to the third problem, complexity and documentation overload. The team tries to do too much with too little. They maybe grab generic templates online, end up creating this mountain of documentation that's overly complex, nobody really understands it, and it doesn't reflect how the business actually works.
And then people just ignore it. Employee resistance.
Precisely. It becomes a paper exercise, a bureaucratic burden instead of a useful security framework. And that's often rooted back in that initial lack of genuine leadership commitment and resourcing.
You mentioned the Canva case study earlier as a success story. How did they overcome that, especially the cultural aspect? How did they make it a value, not just a project?
Canva's example, especially after they had a breach, showed the power of founder-level buy-in. They didn't just approve the project. They made security a core strategic priority. This unlocked serious investment. They mentioned a 5-fold increase in security spending.
5-fold. Wow.
Yeah. But critically, those resources allowed them to implement the ISMS properly, not as a bolt-on layer of rules, but integrated into how they worked. They used the ISO framework to bring structure and consistency, but tailored it to their culture. By making it practical and demonstrating the value-protecting users, enabling business of this, they turned it into something employees could support, even be proud of, rather than resent. It became a competitive edge.
Okay, so you've done the prep, you've got the buy-in, you've built the system. Now you call in the external auditors. You mentioned a 2-stage audit process. What's the difference between stage 1 and stage 2?
The stage 1 audit is essentially a documentation review. The auditor comes in, sits down, and looks at the core design of your ISMS. Do you have the mandatory documented information? Is your scope clearly defined? Is your statement of applicability complete and justified? Is your risk treatment plan logical? Do your policies meet the standards requirements? They're checking if, on paper, your system design is compliant with ISO 27001.
So they're not testing controls yet?
Not usually in detail. They're making sure the blueprint is sound before they check the construction. A common failure point in stage 1 is finding that the ISO-A or RTP is too generic or hasn't been updated as stagnant SOA.
Okay, so if you pass stage 1, then comes stage 2.
Right. The stage 2 audit is the operational effectiveness review. This is where the auditor verifies that your ISMS is not only designed correctly, but is actually being followed in practice.
How do they do that?
Through evidence gathering. They'll conduct interviews with staff at various levels and in different departments, not just IT or security, to check their awareness and understanding of relevant policies and procedures. They'll review records and logs, access logs, change logs, incident reports, training records, internal audit reports, management review minutes. They'll observe processes in action, maybe check physical security controls. They're looking for evidence that the controls you claim to have implemented in your SOA are actually working effectively day to day.
So stage 1 is, did you design it right? Stage 2 is, are you actually doing it?
That's a good summary.
And getting the certificate isn't the end of the story, is it? It's a cycle.
Absolutely not the end. The certificate is typically valid for 3 years. But to maintain it, you have to undergo surveillance audits conducted by your certification body. Usually annually in year 1 and year 2 after certification. These are like mini audits. They don't cover everything, but they check that you're maintaining the ISMS, that you're continuing to conduct internal audits and management reviews, that you're addressing any nonconformities, and maybe they'll sample some specific controls.
And then in year 3?
In year 3, before the certificate expires, you have to go through a full recertification audit. This is much more comprehensive, similar in scope and depth to the initial stage 2 audit. If you pass that, your certificate is renewed for another 3 years, and the surveillance cycle starts again. It reinforces the PDCA loop. Continuous maintenance and improvement is mandatory.
Okay, the security world has lots of frameworks and standards. How does ISO 27001 fit with, say, the NIST cybersecurity framework? The NIST CSF is huge, especially in the US. Are they competitors?
Complements. They're definitely complementary. They serve slightly different purposes but work very well together. ISO 27001, as we've discussed, is the international certifiable standard focused on building and maintaining the overall information security management system, the ISMS, driven by PDCA. It requires external audits.
Right. And NIST CSF?
The NIST CSF is primarily a U.S.-developed voluntary risk management framework. It's not really designed for certification, though some programs are emerging. It organizes security activities into 5 core functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. It provides a great structure for organizing and improving cybersecurity practices, and it's free to use. It's more focused on the what to do across those 5 functions, while ISO is more about the how to manage it all systematically.
So if a company is already using NIST CSF, does pursuing ISO 27001 mean starting over?
Not at all. In fact, it's a significant head start. The controls and practices outlined in NIST CSF map very closely to many of the requirements in ISO 27001, particularly the Annex A controls. Studies have shown the overlap is really high, maybe around 80–85%.
So you can leverage your NIST work.
Absolutely. If you've implemented NIST CSF thoroughly, you've likely already done a lot of the groundwork needed for ISO 27001 Annex A controls and parts of the risk management process. You can use your NIST documentation and evidence as a strong foundation, mapping it across to the ISO requirements. It makes achieving ISO certification much more efficient.
Okay, that's helpful. Now let's talk about the intersection with law. We mentioned GDPR earlier. GDPR is mandatory EU privacy law with potentially huge fines. ISO 27001 is voluntary. How does implementing a voluntary standard help comply with a mandatory law like GDPR?
It's a perfect example of how standards support regulation. GDPR, particularly Article 32, requires organizations processing personal data to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to ensure security suitable to the risk.
Appropriate measures. That sounds a bit vague.
It is deliberately. The law states the required outcome security appropriate to the risk, but it doesn't prescribe exactly how you must achieve it because technology and threats change constantly.
And that's where ISO 27001 comes in.
Exactly. ISO 27001 provides a comprehensive, internationally recognized, and audible framework for implementing those appropriate technical and organizational measures. The ISMS structure, the risk assessment process, the Annex A, controls covering things like access control, encryption, incident response, data minimization, secure deletion. These directly address the kinds of measures GDPR envisages.
So having an ISO 27001 certification acts as evidence.
Yeah, acts as strong evidence of due diligence. If, unfortunately, you do have a breach, being able to demonstrate to regulators that you had a certified ISO 27001 ISMS in place is a very significant mitigating factor. It shows you took security seriously, followed best practices, and implemented a robust system. It doesn't guarantee no fines, but it certainly helps demonstrate you weren't negligent, which is key under GDPR.
Makes sense. Can we look at a couple more real-world examples? How have specific sectors used ISO 27001 strategically?
Sure. Think about healthcare. We saw a case with a company called Healthcare RM. They were dealing with highly sensitive patient data and needed to comply with strict regulations like IP in the US. They used ISO 27001 to move away from scattered manual security processes towards a unified, systematic ISMS. The result: better IP compliance, yes, but also a reported 40% reduction in patient data incidents, which massively boosted trust with patients and partners.
Okay, healthcare trust is paramount. What about finance?
In finance, we saw an example of a large institution with operations in many different countries. They faced a real headache trying to manage security consistently across diverse local regulations and practices. They adopted ISO 27001 as their global standard. This allowed them to unify their security policies, streamline compliance efforts across all subsidiaries, significantly reduce administrative overhead, and provide consistent assurance to regulators and clients worldwide.
So, standardization saves money and reduces complexity. Okay, final section, looking ahead. Standards have to evolve. What are the big trends the ISO committee, JTC 1SC27, is likely wrestling with for future versions of 27001?
There are some huge technological shifts they absolutely have to address. One major one is the looming threat of quantum computing to current cryptography.
Right, the quantum apocalypse for encryption.
Exactly. Today's standard encryption algorithms, like RSA and ECC, will eventually be breakable by large-scale quantum computers. The standard will need to incorporate requirements for transitioning to post-quantum cryptography algorithms to ensure long-term confidentiality and integrity. That's a big challenge coming relatively soon.
What else? AI has to be on the radar. Oh, massively. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are double-edged swords. AI can be used to enhance security, think AI-powered threat detection, improving 8.5.7 threat intelligence, or automating compliance checks. But AI can also be used to create more sophisticated attacks. The standard will need to evolve to provide guidance on securely developing and deploying AI systems, as well as using AI defensively and defending against AI-driven attacks. So AI as a tool and a threat. Any other big drivers?
IoT and cloud services continue to evolve rapidly. Expect future revisions to include even more specific and granular controls for securing the Internet of Things ecosystem and addressing the complexities of multi-cloud, serverless, and other advanced cloud architectures. And finally, regulatory pressure keeps increasing globally. Things like the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA, for the financial sector, are pushing organizations towards greater demonstrable resilience, and frameworks like ISO 27001 provide the how-to. These regulations often implicitly, or sometimes explicitly, encourage or require adherence to such standards. Expect that trend to continue driving adoption and shaping future requirements, probably leading to more updates around 2025 or shortly after. #tag outro.
Well, that was a really comprehensive deep dive into ISO 27001. If you, our listeners, take away just a few key things, maybe remember these. First, the ISMS isn't static. It's a living system, constantly improving through that PDCA cycle.
That's crucial. Continual improvement.
Second, its real value goes way beyond just compliance. It's strategic. It's a powerful signal of trust that can genuinely open doors and protect your business.
A marketable asset, really.
And third, none of it works without real, visible, committed leadership from the very top. That buy-in unlocks everything else.
Absolutely. That holistic view is vital. It's a certificate you get at the end. Shouldn't feel like the finish line. It's more like validation, confirmation that you've built an enduring commitment to protecting information. And that commitment, that proof of maturity, is just essential for building trust and surviving long-term in today's global marketplace.
So we've spent this time digging into how the ISMS helps you manage the risks you can, broadly speaking, identify and plan for today. But here's a final thought to chew on as you look at your own security setup. How does this whole structured plan, do, check, act approach fundamentally need to change when the biggest risks aren't just things you detect, but things being generated almost in real time by autonomous, malicious AI systems? Which parts of the current standard, which specific Annex A controls maybe the proactive requirements in 8.5.7 threat intelligence, or perhaps the technical defenses in 8.8.7 protection against malware, which of these will become obsolete first as adversarial AI truly reshapes the threat landscape?